Hello, welcome everyone. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this live stream interview today. So I have a very special guest for our guest interview today, everyone. I'm going to introduce her officially in a moment, but this is my best friend, Angelina Vasile from Portland, Oregon. Hi, Angie.
Hi, babe.
I'm so happy you're here. And I took notes, and I have like all these amazing questions for you, but I wrote 3 times in my notes to breathe. So I'm just going to take a breath right now. So I can see people joining. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Please comment below where you're joining us from, and if you have any experience with trauma-informed approaches to yoga, to Pilates, to coaching. This is what we're going to be talking about today. And so we'd love to hear if you have questions. We may be able to sneak them in. So please do write them in the chat. There's a little delay on these live streams, so we don't see them right away, but they'll pop up after a couple minutes. So let me introduce, I'm going to read, Ange, I'm going to read you your bio, but then I have a personal introduction as well. So let's start with that. This is my best friend of 2 decades, Angelina Vasile. And Angelina is a trauma-informed movement and embodiment teacher and a group facilitator. She is a white, 3rd-generation Mexican, native North American of Mexican and Apache descent, and 3rd-generation Sicilian of immigrants through Ellis Island. She straddles these realities, embracing her brown identity culture and her responsibility as a white-bodied person. Her life and her work is centered in community, accountability, ancestry and history, and the skill of being present to self, to others, and to the natural world in order to create safer spaces for exploration, healing, and justice. And I can say, oh, that's true. Oh, that's true. How does that feel like hearing that out loud?
I mean, my heart is racing. It feels like that's one of the most concise bios I've ever written. So thanks for the the spark to do that.
Awesome.
3 lines is a tough one, but yeah, I feel like that's a good representation.
Yeah, totally. So y'all need to know before we go any further that, you know, Ange and I are best friends of 20 years. We actually met 20 years ago, around this time, actually, probably in January of 2001.
Yep.
We met in our first Pilates teacher training in the Mission of San Francisco, at in that building off of Cesar Chavez. You remember that big building?
Yeah.
And that was when we did our teacher training with Ellie Herman back in the day when she lived in San Francisco. Crazy. And then Ange and I also, I mean, not only did we become besties during that time, but then we also worked together in the Pilates kind of studio scene here in the Bay Area for some years. Then we did the same yoga teacher training in 2007. We both went to Seattle for the Forest Yoga teacher training, which was both of our first 200-hour. And since then, our career paths have actually gone in very different directions. So for those of y'all who don't know me, I'm Kiki Lovelace, and I am the owner and director of education at Interstellar Pilates and Yoga Studio here in Berkeley, California. And I've also in the last 4 years built a second business, coaching and consulting I serve like 100K plus wellness business owners and creatives and change makers, helping them scale to multi-6 and 7 figures. And I also run my business, my studio business as well. And Angelina, your career has gone in a very different direction. And you have been in the last, how many years have you been with Living Yoga? You've been working as a trauma-informed teacher, but also trainer to teachers and volunteers. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit about your role at Living Yoga.
So Living Yoga and I met in 2008 is when I did my personal volunteer training. So I went through their volunteer training program and I became a volunteer at that time. I didn't get super invested in my volunteer work until 2010. And then in about 2011 or 12, I was invited on staff as one of the trainers for the volunteer teacher training. So I've been working with them for over 10 years on staff, or around 10 years on staff.
Yeah. And so, you know, a lot of people in my audience, you know, I have tons of yoga teachers and Pilates teachers and business owners and such. And I also, you know, as you know, I have like a huge community now of fellow coaches in the like transformational coaching industry, right, which are both mostly white dominated industries. I guess my first question for you is more about the trauma-informed piece. I'm curious, like, you know, I think I know what trauma-informed means, but I would love to hear you explain what that is, what that means for your teaching too, and like, how has that changed your teaching, your Pilates and your yoga teaching and your space holding as a facilitator?
It's changed everything. And I guess I'll start by saying that I strongly believe that a trauma-informed or trauma-safe or trauma-sensitive approach is the way of the future. Like, we all experience trauma, and oftentimes in the trainings or the workshops that I offer, we'll talk about like big T trauma, like acute trauma, and then more little t trauma or chronic or cumulative trauma. So over a lifetime of, let's say, racism, right? Microaggressions. But a trauma-informed approach basically completely dismantles the one-size-fits-all approach. And it allows for folks to explore in their own way what healing or safety or a sense of dignity or belonging means to them and their bodies. So in a wellness space, like say yoga or coaching, you can't come at it as a one size fits all. I can't just teach a pose and say, this is the pose. The pose has many different incarnations based on who's doing it and what that person specifically needs in the moment. So a trauma-informed approach uses language and offerings that are able to hold everyone or the most people possible. So options and real invitations to explore what is meaningful or necessary in a moment for that particular person. And the other thing that I think that's really been impactful in my personal teaching, specifically when I work with youth in corrections or in recovery facilities, is just recognizing that trauma shows up so differently for every person. And so my judgmental mind has been challenged over and over again. You know, oftentimes we see people act out, even in a public studio space, not only in living yoga classrooms where I teach those volunteer classes, but you know, people act out or people do things that are maybe seem outside of the realm of correct etiquette in a space. And what I've learned is that, like, there are so many signs of trauma or somebody who is experiencing an activation, and to really become more compassionate and just sort of query in myself, what's going on here? Like, not what's wrong with this person or why the hell is this person doing that, but what's happening here and how can I offer support in a way that's going to build this person's resilience and self-regulation.
Wow. And I know that, like, your trauma-informed approach, especially you, and this is, I don't gather that this is true for every trauma-informed movement teacher, but it has definitely, you definitely see it through a racial justice and social justice lens. And I know that you had shared with me that several years ago at Living Yoga, the team added an equity advisor as like a central role in the organization. So can you tell us a little bit about what that person does and like how has their influence shifted what you all are doing as a mostly white, right? Is it mostly white teachers and trainers? So how has that shifted things for you?
Oh, this is such a big question. And it's a big, I mean, you and I have talked about this, about like sitting in a conflicted state. So as a nonprofit who is invested in bringing healing practices to corrections, recovery, mental health facilities in our community, and really addressing the most marginalized among us, you have to bring in race. You have to bring in accessibility to different populations. And if we're talking about collective liberation, we have to start addressing the fact that our wellness spaces are mostly white. Right. And that we're the most privileged of all. And so how are we actually healing our communities when folks who are being perpetually held in a state of repression or oppression are not accessing our offerings. Like, that's not okay. And what we realized in Living Yoga is that we are serving those communities, and yet we are mostly white-bodied. And so we have a real lack of representation, and representation is invaluable when we're offering healing practices. So our drive has always been about social justice, but we really had to start looking at who is our community of students, and how do we better serve them, and what they're experiencing. And if we're white-bodied, we don't really know. We don't have the lived experience. So we need more tools and more teachers and facilitators who can offer appropriate practices and language around the equity and the racial justice piece of wellness spaces, or healing movement, or healing practices. So our facilitator, at Living Yoga, has really helped us go deeper into our own whiteness, really, because that's what we as white-bodied people can do, is start to understand where and how we're perpetuating systems of oppression, or where and how we're not showing up as allies or true accomplices to our Black and Brown community members. And as we've started to unpack our whiteness as a staff at Living Yoga, we can then better find our blind spots within our offerings, and for me personally as well, and then address that, and to really push our community to widen the lens, the perspective about who we're serving and why.
Yeah, which are such important questions to ask yourself. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you here doing this?
That's right.
And I think a lot of us, especially, I know for me, when I started in on learning about racial inequities, especially in the wellness space, I was coming to it totally from a white savior place. And I was just telling you this yesterday, of like, white people love to implement. They love to have a list of things to do and then tick them off their list. And it's mostly because it's about them. It's about them feeling better about themselves. So I want to talk about something that you had mentioned to me the other day about spiritual bypassing. And I know you'd mentioned that this is one of the main sort of harmful, I'm sure there's a lot of harmful things that we white folks are doing in our movement classes, in our fitness classes, and in these transformational coaching spaces. But that's one of them. That's one of them. And so can you define for us, like, what is spiritual bypassing? Can you give us some examples of like how you've seen that or experienced that? Mm-hmm. I just want to hear more about, and even like, how can we spot ourselves when we're doing that? Because it's obviously like just a complete sort of lack of seeing clearly, mm-hmm. And it's just based on our ignorance as white people. So tell us about spiritual bypassing.
So spiritual bypassing essentially means that we're avoiding going into the shadow work or the dark spaces by claiming that you have to like elevate yourself or transcend or like enlighten yourself and be up here in only positive land. That the only way to address a situation is like to be the light, to be, to be peaceful, and to be, Buddha on the mountaintop or Siddhartha under the tree. It completely erases the difficulty of material circumstances. So one of the ways that I see it show up a lot in wellness spaces is this idea that we're all one. Theoretically, I believe that, yes, absolutely. But we are not all having the same lived experience. We are not all having the same material experience in this moment. So when you tell somebody who is struggling with poverty that we're all one and that they just need to manifest better, that's perpetuating a spiritual bypassing message that like, you're not being godly enough. You're not being, you're not vibing high enough. You just need to invite in the light and then maybe you won't be poor. It's like, no, that's bullshit. You know, people are poor because of systemic racism and systemic inequities that are built into the structure of our nation, you know, and our culture. So we can believe that we're all one and that we're all interconnected, but that's not the space that we need to start from. We need to start from the reality that we are having different lived experiences and that trauma and inequity disproportionately affects certain communities. And when we honor that truth, then we can start to parse out and disentangle and get to a place where we're all one is an experience, not a theory. Mm. The other thing that I see this a lot in like social media stuff, I follow a lot of radical thought leaders and change makers, and mostly I listen, you know, when I'm in those spaces, when I'm in Black spaces, especially, and that is not my lived experience, I listen. And what I invariably see is white people coming in and being like, you're being negative.
Right.
You're yeah. And so that is another aspect of spiritual bypassing. It's like calling out the truth is not negative. You know, being fierce is not negative. Like there's an aspect of compassion that is fierce. You know, if you think about mama bears and nature, you know, it's like, it's not all fluffy and lovey all the time. We sometimes have to be more assertive in stating truths, especially when people aren't listening, you know, so we have to go about it in different ways. So that's one way I see it happen in social media a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I want to name that, like, in my business coaching world, like I see this so often with business coaches, and I teach mindset as like a huge piece, and mindset and energy management as a huge piece of how to create 10K, 20K, 40K, 80K months. And I see this all the time, like in my industry, that people say, oh, it's all mindset. If you just manage your mindset, then you can, and like, you know, sprinkle in a little strategy, then you can make all this money. But it's not, we're not all starting from the same place.
Exactly.
Right. And so, yeah, so I want to name that I try to be very sensitive when I'm talking about mindset to speak about it in a particular way. And I'm sure I've made a million mistakes about it, you know, but that is a form of spiritual bypassing, you know, in my, what I see all the time in my social media feed. Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful to hear. Mm-hmm. So I know a huge foundational principle of your work when you're mentoring other facilitators, other coaches, other Pilates, yoga, movement teachers and such, you really hone in on like radical embodiment and like being in your body, self-regulating in the face of difficult conversations, uncomfortable moments. Mm-hmm. And I know this is part of like your soul mission here. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the role you feel that you're here to play in helping be a facilitator like that, but also in helping teach your people, your students and your mentees about what it is to be resourced and present so that they can show up for these challenging conversations? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is actually a good dovetail with the mindset piece. The way that I approach this in my own practice and in facilitating with others is like recognizing bodily sensations while recognizing mindset, while recognizing action. And they're not always congruent or in alignment. And I don't know if you remember, I won't use her name, but there was somebody in, I don't know if she was in our training, maybe she was in my advanced teacher training, but talking about being in a handstand and you know, beautiful handstand and just shit talking herself inside, just like, and that misalignment. And so my approach to embodiment and facilitating from a deeply present place, particularly for stepping confidently or bravely into conflict or interrupting oppression or racism, is to recognize first what's happening in the body, because information from our nervous system, 80 to 90% is bottom to top. So it's bodily to brain. So our bodies, like I can feel my heart racing right now because I'm talking about truths, right? So I can feel my feet are sweating right now. My pit skis are sweating, even though it's kind of cold in this room, you know? Like these are my bodily reactions when I'm talking about things that I am passionate about and that I care about, right? That are meaningful to me. And what that information tells me is like, slow down, you know, so that I can process the bodily information and then figure out in my brain with critical thinking and mindset what to do. Just did this the other day, had a really tough conversation with a community member who's in our pod about like the whole pandemic, blah, going back to school, all of that. That's a whole nother conversation. But man, I was fucking fired up, and I hope I can swear on this little interview here because you know I got a potty mouth. But I was so activated, and I just knew I just need to listen. I can't talk yet. Like I really have to pause and be in the space where before I speak something. And you know, teaching is like that too. If you believe that you're not going to be activated, but just because you're the space holder, you're done. Like we as space holders are going to be activated. We're going to have students, conversations, situations that bring us up or bring us down. And so our best bet at becoming space holders is figuring out how to regulate and how to respond to our own systems of activation or depression. Right. And I want to say this is a side note, but like depression is a reaction. Like, I mean, I'm talking about like nervous system, like dissociation is a reaction. It's not a response. So it's something that our fight, flight, or freeze response will do when we're flooded. But I think it's helpful to know that like a depressive state or a dissociated state or a shutdown state is a reaction of the nervous system, not a response. And so what I want to teach is how to respond to your internal environment and your external environment.
So is this how you would define resilience? Like I was reading looking again for the millionth time at your website and also at Living Yoga's website this morning as I was preparing for this. And I was noticing that word resilience. And I was like, wow, like when you were just describing that process of like, oh, my armpits are sweating. I'm like, my thoughts are racing. It's not an appropriate time for me to respond. Let me just breathe, listen, and ground really before I take any action. Like, is that how you would define resilience? Like what does that mean really to be resilient in your own body? Like, what does that mean to you, or how do you teach that?
Yeah, I think it's one aspect of resilience. Slowing down is not what the culture conditions us to do. It takes a lot of bravery to slow down. And I think you and I have even talked about this in regards to breath, that you have to get comfortable with awkward pauses so that you can inhale, right? It takes a moment. Right. So I would say slowing down and pausing is a resiliency practice. Feeling the earth is another resiliency practice. Noting the sunlight coming in through my window right now can be a resiliency practice because it brings me back to the present moment. That lots of things can be resiliency practices, but it's like the idea behind resilience is to keep you in the moment so that you can respond and not react. Again, those two words, right? And oftentimes what we're reacting to is ancient, right? So like I have generational trauma in me, and I'm really just beginning to uncover and discover this. But sometimes if I'm going too fast, I am very angry. And I finally like discovered that a lot of that comes from what my ancestors went through. My mom, you know, she didn't do as much like talking about our ancestry or like what they might have gone through. And I think that was her resilience, was her survival mechanism, was to like, it's done, it's over with, let's move on and be happy and joyful. For me, I'm like, let's dig into this shit because my ancestors went through some stuff. And sometimes I think part of my anger and angst is from generational trauma and like the things that have not been healed within my family line.
Wow.
So I don't want to react from my ancient wounding. I want to respond from this room, this space, this body, my feelings, and all the things that I've accumulated, you know, the wisdom of my ancestors, as well as the wisdom of my own work. So to me, those are resiliency practices.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, as you were describing some of those things like breathing, feeling the ground, you know, like feeling the sunlight coming through the window, I was thinking, oh yeah, those are like some of my self-care practices. And then I remembered that last night when we were talking, you were like, self-care is a lie. So, and I didn't ask you about it last night because I wanted to be surprised. So what do you mean self-care is a lie? Like how are we fucking up by only focusing on that? Is that what you're saying? That we're fucking up by only focusing on that?
I think it's like the way that self-care has been packaged to us is a lie. So again, I'm scratching the surface on these topics.
Right. Sure.
And these are, you know, you could take one of these phrases or words and dive deep, you know, into study around them. I feel like, you know, you and I know, we all know in this industry, there are buzzwords. Self-care has become one of those buzzwords over the past, you know, 5, 10, 12 years. And I feel like the way it's been promoted is very capitalistic and individualistic. And it completely negates the fact that we have a responsibility to each other. And here's the irony of this that I find so fascinating is that particularly yoga, mindfulness, spiritual people, again, we are all one, we're all connected. And yet their healing is all about themselves and their own success and their own self-care. How do you get here if you're not taking into account communal care? Right. And I read this the other day and it was so powerful to me. I wish I could remember who wrote it or where I read it, but it was basically like, if your vision is only for your own healing or your own success, your vision isn't big enough.
Right.
And that's what I mean by like self-care is a delusion, because we can do all the self-care that we have access to, and we all have different access, right? Massage, going for a walk, splashing water on our face. Those are self-care practices, and we all have different access to them. But essentially and eventually, we have to go back out into the world. And if the world is toxic, if the world is oppressive, if the world is racist, we're doing triage.
Right.
You know, okay, I'm going to go back in the world. Like, you can change yourself, but if you don't change the systems, it's just a vicious cycle. I have to go out and then I have to come back in and take care of myself. And then I have to go back out there and then I have to come back in and take care of myself. Well, what if my self-care included my community so that slowly over time out there is also healing, not just in here? So my belief is that self-care needs to include not just you. And that's not to say we don't need alone time. Like I need a lot of alone time.
Right.
But my alone time also includes visioning for how I can bring more people into healing, more people into resilience, more people into indigenous and ancestral wisdom that we've lost and forgotten.
You're reminding me of something that one of my anti-racism mentors, Jonathan Reluccio, who is the founder of an organization that I continue to work with to this day, allthrive.org. They're so amazing. And I remember Jonathan, we were on a panel together, and he said something, you know, I was speaking to, you know, having Interstellar, my yoga and Pilates studio, really is our niche is like healing. It's like inner healing, you know, not just physical healing, because we do work with chronic pain and injuries, but emotional and spiritual healing as well. And he kind of looked at me And he was like, yeah, and if you are going to have a mission that is about healing, it has to include addressing the racial inequities in our, and right, and like the systemic racism in our industry, but everywhere, and in the entire fabric of our culture and society. And I was like, well, damn. But like, it, you know, it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me when he put it like that. If you're dedicated to this, you must be dedicated to this.
That's right.
Because racism is like a huge injury, a system of harm that harms all of us. You know?
It harms all of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point for our viewers today, like your audience and my audience, is to recognize that your yoga space is not outside of the culture. Because people are bringing themselves into your space. People are wounded and traumatized. All of us are. So, you know, the space is a container, but it's also a reflection of our culture. Mm. So if you're trying if you are perpetuating this idea that your space, you know, I see people talk on social media about like, oh, we don't do politics at our studio. It's like, yes, you do. Whether you know it or not, you are fucking involved in politics. And if you are evading that fact, you are doing harm. Mm. Because people, you know, walk into your studio and you have a responsibility to hold what people walk in with. They don't just drop their identities at the door.
Right.
Right? We show up, and if we're asking people to show up, how can we not acknowledge the realities that different bodies are living in? That's how I want to change spaces. You know, I feel like we as an industry have got to start addressing that culture is in the studio. It's in the space. Identities are in the space, and we need to acknowledge and offer repairs that are accessible for different bodies and different experiences.
Yes, yeah, totally. So you have a program coming up, like a more advanced mentorship for people who are already in the field and doing and want to really start to move through into their work through this lens of trauma informed, of racial justice. Can you tell us a little bit about this program and who it's for, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the mentorship program is, it's about a 9-month program, and it's for yoga teachers, wellness industry professionals, be they, I think I have one acupuncturist in the program right now. I have some race and equity folks who are facilitating race and equity work who are involved. Anybody who wants to hold space for this type of healing, for this type of justice, for this type of transformation that we're talking about. And what I will offer in this mentorship program is like a really deep dive into personal embodiment and how to show up in those spaces with an explicitly open vocabulary and invitation to folks of all different types of bodies and experiences. The thing that I think is really special about this particular program is like, I am on fire in these types of situations. I love teaching teachers. I love teaching people who want to go deeper, and I go there with you. Like I am with my students 100% of the way, because I am learning too. You know, I have been doing this work for over 10 years in terms of the trauma-informed piece, but I'm still messing up. You know, I'm still learning, and my teachers, you know, are holding me accountable. And that's the other thing that I think is really important about this program is it's a real challenge or like invitation to be held accountable, you know? And I think this is another piece of that communal care versus self-care, is that we can't do this work alone. You know, we need each other to bounce these ideas off of and to reflect with. You know, I have my accountability partners that I reach out to regularly and say, am I saying this right? Will you read this for me? You know, will you help me to clarify what I want to say here. And I think this entire program is about that. You know, how can we help hold each other accountable and even ourselves accountable? You know, in the moment, you were talking about spiritual bypassing and like how to spot ourselves. And I think another sort of challenge to the culture that we've been conditioned in is to practice humility and to say in the moment, I was wrong, or I said that wrong. Can I retract? Can I step back and rephrase that cue? Or can I rephrase that request? You know, and I feel like this is the type of stuff that I want to teach people to get more comfortable doing, because our humility is essential for the progress and healing of everyone.
Yeah, totally. And I know, like, for me, having, you know, my own anti-racism mentors who I've been working with, you know, I meet like quarterly, if not more often with them, having people to do this work with for an extended time. Like, it's different when you just take like a weekend workshop or something. That's super valuable, definitely. But when you work with people like what you're doing over the span of a certain amount of time, it changes the depth. And I know I was telling you that, like, you know, one of my mentors, Wendy, like literally DM'd me on Instagram when I posted that we were going to do this interview. She's like, do you want to run by the talking points by me? Like, how can I help? You know? And I was like, oh, I love it. It's so nice to feel like you like, how could you figure it out on your own? And I know
absolutely.
Yeah. And I know that's a part of like whiteness, is we try to do it all on our own. So I love that you're right. So you're like creating this space to have a community container for this learning, not just an individual like learning pace. So okay. So I know you've run this program before. Can you tell us, like, at the end of the 9 months, how would you most want to see your graduates feel in themselves? Like, what would they be able to track in their own self, in their own body, in their own confidence, in their own vocabulary? What would be different if they were to do this program with you?
I think they would have confidence in holding space for all different types of people. I think they would have confidence in using trauma-informed language and really understanding what that means. I feel like they will have a community, like you were saying, to hold them accountable. I did exactly what your mentor did with you the other day with an old mentee several months ago. I saw an Instagram post and I was like, hey, I'm seeing some problematic things in this. Can we talk? You know, like we're building a community of spotters. You know, I like your language that you talk about spotting each other, you know. And I feel like, really importantly, people will be able to address the elephant in the room, you know, and I'm talking about explicitly starting your practices, whatever they might be, acknowledging what's happening that day. So if there's been an insurrection at the Capitol, like, can I comfortably address what people might be feeling or what I'm feeling?
In my teaching, like today,
right now in class, can I say, hey, we are all probably reeling from the events of blah, blah, blah. Or today I want to talk about what just happened here.
Right.
And to not, I think too many wellness spaces, you know, they confuse safety with avoidance.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
And so avoiding the hard truths is actually not helping people heal.
Right.
It's perpetuating escapism and, you know, a broader sort of stuff it under the rug kind of mentality.
Right.
And so I would love for my graduates of this program to feel really comfortable truth speaking, talking about cultural appropriation and their own inner conflict with teaching whatever ancestral lineages they're teaching. Hello, like I'm still in process. You and I know, like, this is difficult to reconcile the cultural appropriation of our practices and our industry. So that's another thing that I would like people to come away with. And also to become better listeners, I think is helpful. Because we'll be in this program for a long period of time with each other. Man, it's so powerful when we start each session and we just hear what other people are going through. Like, our view of what's possible and what other people are experiencing expands. We come out of our own tunnel vision. And so I feel like this program helps train you how to be an active listener.
Which I can
listen.
Yeah, which I can see would obviously help you as a facilitator, but also helps you in your family, in a million other little circles, you know, in which you're always operating. So yeah, that's amazing. So I'll put the link to, you know, if people want to learn more about your program. I know you have a special sign up bonus that if they sign up before April 1st, which is in what, like 2 days?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Oh, it's tomorrow?
So by end of day tomorrow. Yeah. So
yeah, tell us about the bonus.
Okay, so the bonus is I'm going to give whoever signs up before end of day tomorrow, I'm going to give you my personal checklist of how I recognize white body supremacy in my own actions. So this is like a detailed list of things that I go through so that I can recognize my behavior and when it's being dictated by the conditioning of white body supremacy. And white body supremacy is a term that I'm using from Resma Menachem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands. And I really think that's a really potent word for all of us within wellness spaces to recognize and to start using.
In particular, the white body supremacy is what you're talking
exactly.
about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll give you my personal checklist, like the things that I go through. I'm like, ooh.
It's coming up. Yeah.
It's coming up.
That's so powerful. I love that's a gift that you can give to your people as they're coming into this. Cause I love that it acknowledges that, like, you're not perfect. We're not perfect. Perfection is not even the objective. That's not
Perfectionism is on that list.
Oh, wow. Perfect. Yeah, exactly. Like, that's one of the signals to you. I love that. That's awesome. Amazing. Well, thank you, Angelina. This has been like so illuminating and powerful. And I love listening to you speak because I know you could speak about this for days. You're just in your zone of brilliance when you are speaking about these things, when you're holding this kind of space. And yeah, I know your people who work with you are just going to be in such caring hands. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiki. I love you so much. Thanks for doing this. It was so fun.
For watching. It was so great. All right. Cheers, everybody. Take care.
Mwah.